predicting where the user is likely to go next, and what the browser should do in response to it. There's, of course, existing work on prefetching and pre-rendering, and we know that other browsers, I'm from the Chrome team, by the way, are working on prefetching and pre-rendering, at the very least, from their own UI surfaces, like the address bar. And we know that authors also want to make content-initiated navigation fast, too. There's a lot of new challenges to make this useful for developers. My focus today is on making it possible to tell when a document was prefetched. So we're going to tell the server that this is a request whose purpose is to prefetch it, but also so that when the document is subsequently loaded, that the author can reason about, okay, this document was prefetched, and that might be why my LCP is faster this time, or that might be why something didn't behave the way that I expected. There's a lot of other stuff going on here about thinking about how does prediction work from content, how's prediction work from browser Chrome, how do we make prefetching work in a way that's consistent with cookie blocking and partitioning that a lot of browsers are shipping and planning to ship, how to deal with providing IP anonymity for cases where the site doesn't want to do the prefetch unless the user can be anonymized, because the IP address can be used as a vector for identifying the user. There's also work being done in pre-rendering to distinguish as a document being rendered, and to try and write down what the behavior of a document is during pre-rendering, so that developers can understand what's going on in their document when it's being pre-rendered. And ideally, that could become interoperable over time with the variety of browsers' implementations of pre-rendering. But at the moment today, I'm sort of going to focus on distinguishing was a document prefetched. So it's really useful for authors to know this, and currently there's not an easy way for them to tell that I'm aware of. It's useful so they can reason about how the prefetch affected the performance of their navigation. That might be why the navigation is fast, and we want authors to be able to know that their navigation, it might be fast because it was prefetched, to encourage them to roll that out more. It also might be related to their business metrics. The fact that the navigation was faster because of prefetch might mean that users are more engaged, and being able to tell that programmatically is quite useful. This feels like a description of the navigation, like how authors can learn about other activity that happened during to fetch the page using navigation timing. So the simplest take on this that I could come up with is to add a Boolean to the performance navigation timing interface, just says prefetched. It's fairly simple and easy to understand. It doesn't provide a natural place to provide additional information about this in the future, but it doesn't necessarily preclude that. So this is just a snippet of JavaScript about what that sort of option would look like, and just a short partial interface on the prefetch navigation timing interface. Sort of a second idea in that space was to add a dedicated information related to the prefetch. So instead of just having a Boolean, having an interface there that would be null if there's no prefetch, where we could say, was the prefetch used? And therefore the authors can tell, well, maybe a prefetch was attempted but couldn't be used because there was some sort of failure or mismatch, or some condition failed that prevented the prefetch from being used. Also information potentially about how long the prefetch took, or how much bandwidth it took, or various other information. We can obviously expose this in the browser developer tools, but there might be value in developers being able to deal with this programmatically and feed it into analytics. And then just a sort of another take is, instead of saying, well, maybe this isn't really a description of the navigation, maybe it's really more like a separate resource fetch. And so we should have a different resource timing entry for the navigation prefetch, and that can tell you if it's used and why it wasn't used. That would sort of, struck by the structure of it, imply also sending, unless we need to redact or censor it, all the information that we get for other resource timings, like how long the TLS connection setup was and what the exact timing of those parts of that fetch were relative to one another. You can imagine that potentially being useful the way it's useful for other resources, but it becomes a little bit more complicated to figure out what we can expose there and what we can't, and it's not obvious how much value this adds over the other alternatives. But that's sort of the third option that occurred to me. I'm curious what people's insight about what the right level of granularity and what the right format to expose this information is. And that's the end of the presentation that I have.
So I'll stop the recording and we can discuss.